Hey there, DC fans. This is Josh Rayner, editor-in-chief of DC Comics News, here to give you a special deal from Insight Editions. Insight Editions is an amazing company who sells books and collectibles from all sorts of pop culture, whether it be DC Comics, Marvel Comics, movies like Die Hard, Harry Potter, Alien, everything out there in the world you can find. You got books, collectibles, pop-up greeting cards. They have all kinds of amazing items, and right now you can get 35% off site-wide by using the code DCNews35. That's DCNEWS 35. DC News 35. Use that code and receive 35% off site-wide at insighteditions.com.
Hello listeners, and welcome to another episode of the DC Comics News Podcast. And this week is another special episode with a great creator interview. With us this evening is the brilliant Matthew K. Manning, the man who's given us gems like The Batman Vault, Anatomy of the Metahuman, and we'll be talking about his new book, Exploring Gotham City, which is out in a couple of weeks' time from Insight Editions. Joining Matthew and myself is Brad Felicki, always with us. Hi, Brad.
Hey, how's everybody doing?
And Kendra Hale.
Hello, hello.
And the man himself, Matthew K. Manning. Thanks for joining us. How are you?
I'm pretty good. Thanks for having me.
Oh, thanks for joining us. Obviously, we've got lots to talk about, a brand new book on the way, and obviously you've already got some great hits under your belt already. So let's start with the questions. So over to Kendra.
I think my first question would be, what was your favorite part of setting up this book, of dissecting everything and giving us all this information that is absolutely wonderful?
Thanks. I'm not sure if I have a favorite part. I really always like digging into the some of the Anton Furst architecture, that because Anton Furst did the designs for the '89 Batman movie, and then he was hired by Denny O'Neil to do designs for the comic book universe. So anytime we do that, like Old Wayne Tower or the Gotham City Police Department building, those kind of things, it always brings back some nice nostalgia from when I was first reading.
Very cool. Brad?
Okay, and the Insight Edition books, they are these incredible pieces of art, and such encyclopedic knowledge goes into them and everything. And I wonder if you could give a little insight, pardon the pun, on how it all comes together. Do they come to you with the concept? Do you pitch them? And how is the art put together? And how is that whole process?
I think all of the Insight books that I've done so far have been Insight projects where they've approached me about them. The first book I did for them was a Wolverine guide, which was I did two Wolverine books. I'm trying to remember the name of this one. It was The World According to Wolverine, it was kind of like his anecdotes and like his advice. And then we did one about Joker after that, and so it was kind of like several different editors have approached me with different projects there, we just kind of I think I've done, I want to say, about a dozen books or so for them at the present. I think we did. I co-wrote a couple of those. The Anatomy of Metahuman was a co-written book, and so it's kind of they kind of range. I've done a couple projects that were even actual comic books for them. So kind of gone over the whole spectrum. I have another one that just came out, which was it's a book about sideshows, fine art prints, and so it kind of discusses all their fine art print program and shows just some amazing art. And I just got the copies of those a couple weeks ago. So.
So cool! I can't wait to see that.
I think it's out now. Actually, I was behind on it because it was one of those jobs that I had to kind of do in between some other larger scale projects. It was more the word count was less, even though it's a big book. it's more art based. So it was one of those that I was doing in between other larger projects like this Exploring Gotham one, which had a lot more research involved. But luckily it's bat research, so that's always the easiest kind for me.
Thank you. And Steve?
Is that the book you were finishing up last week, Matthew, that we were talking about over the last couple of weeks?
No,
is that one you needed to finish?
That's actually a book for Abrams that I'm working on. It's actually a Marvel book, and I don't think it's officially announced yet. So I've done that, and then I did another book.
Okay, so we won't pressure you on that one then.
Yeah, I have two other books that haven't been announced yet that are actually one is completely finished. This Marvel project for Abrams has been written by me, but it hasn't been Marvel hasn't even seen it yet. So I'm anticipating some notes from them and kind of figure out where we are. Sometimes we get a lot of notes and sometimes very little. So it's one of those wait and see games. But it's another one I'm really excited about. It's a book that's in universe, which is kind of fun. So it's more along the lines of a Batman Files type book. I don't know if you saw that book that I did, which was kind of like for Abrams, I also did a book of about the secret files of Barry Allen and the secret files of, I think we did a Supergirl one. I never get to name them, so that's why I always have trouble remembering the titles. I've written like 91 books at this point. I think this is my 91st one I just finished. So, which were very much in world for the CW shows, the Flash and Supergirl books. Mm-hmm. And so it leans more towards that kind of project, which is a lot of fun too.
Wow, I'm glad you brought those up, because the first time I came across your work was the Batman Vault, which was published in the UK by Titan, but it was an Insight production. And that was the first time I came across a book that was filled with like inserts and pullouts and memorabilia. Please tell me about the process of gathering all the really cool stuff in that book.
That actually, DC actually organized almost all of the artifacts, I guess, that they in that book. That was more. This was before the years of DC Entertainment, where there were less people working on the book, and that has its advantages and disadvantages, just like anything else. But for that, we were working so closely with DC that they had access to their art, to all the archives and the comic library and things, and so they were just pulling a lot of stuff out. And for the Batman Vault, Bob Greenberg had already written the first draft of the book, and because we co-wrote that one. And so I was working directly with his copy, and kind of that was another one where I was pulled on really late in the game. It was my first, I want to say it was my first actual book for DC. I'd written some comics at that point, but it was, I think, my first book. I wrote it 2 weeks before my wedding, and then 2 weeks after my honeymoon. So it was, DC was very patient. They actually wouldn't even let me email them during my honeymoon, because I was like, I can check in, and they're like, no. But yeah, so that was fun. But it was kind of just like, if it was any other character, it probably would have been a little bit more difficult for me. But I grew up a Batman guy first and foremost, so those projects are always kind of second nature to me. I can really kind of do them a bit faster because I don't have to double check my facts as much. Although actually these days, the last probably 10, 15 years of comics, I have a harder time remembering. Like the comic I read last week, I can't remember as much as the comic I read in 1989. But
I know that feeling very well.
Yeah, I think I've hit a wall of how many comic books you can read in a lifetime. I know I've read over 20,000 comics. But I'm not sure the exact number anymore.
Wow. Thanks so much. Kendra, your next question.
With the insight that these books give, I mean, you not only get to reference, like you said, classic stories, and in this one you also get the joy of being able to see their impact on Gotham City as of today. Was there a favorite part of the city that you got to showcase that held a little bit more love for you?
Well, a lot of that goes back to still the some of those Anton Furst designs, like visually, but it's actually really fun to just kind of dive into anything that hasn't been like, I really like these specialized books. I did a book for Insight about the Daily Planet, which actually came with a a cool like wooden figure that like of the Daily Planet globe that you put together. But it was a complete history of the Daily Planet, and since it was such a specific subject, it's really fun because you can pretty much tell almost everything about the subject. So like when I got to write about like Amusement Mile or things like that, I really got to kind of dive in and say as many facts as I could about that certain location. But even then, we still had to trim a lot of stuff out, unfortunately. I like for that entry, I can remember I wanted to put we never got to put it in, but I wanted to talk about some of the reasons why Gotham City has failed amusement parks like often. But we had to really kind of focus in on specific like a specific that specific park. Although I think I talked about the theme park from the Gotham Knights miniseries, if I'm remembering right. It's been a while since and like I said, I actually haven't seen the books physically yet, so I'm waiting to get my copies, and I think the comp department takes a little longer. So, and especially everything now during the pandemic has taken way longer to get copies of everything. But yeah, I haven't. But I've seen them. I've seen the art for it because they'll send it to me and ask if I have any other things. It was actually Insights. This is kind of going on a tangent, but if you'll notice on every page there are little Easter eggs of characters doing things in the settings, and that was actually Insight's idea. They wanted to, when they started getting the artwork back, they realized, it's kind of static because it's all buildings and locations and interiors, and can we do anything to spice it up? And so I thought, I did like it was my thought to do kind of like little stories that ran through several of them. So you would see, I think in the Wayne Manor, you see Catwoman breaking.
I was going to ask you about that.
Yeah. So I have her breaking it. That was the idea of making it little stories was where my contribution was. They just wanted like characters doing things, and I thought, might as well tell a story kind of like using the rooms as comic panels. And so we have Catwoman kind of sneaking through Wayne Manor. In the Batcave, we have the League of Assassins, slowly fighting like the whole Bat crowd kind of thing. And then so we kind of did that. I think I threw in. I'm a big fan of the Outsiders, Batman and the Outsiders. It's one of my first comics I ever read. My very first comic I ever read was Batman and the Outsiders number 10. That was so I always have to put in Outsiders whenever I can. And I was happy that they let me do the Wayne Foundation building. So we got to do a little bit of that in there. At least if it made the final cut, I still haven't seen it. Like I said.
It's there. It's definitely there.
Because that one was in continuity. That is in question. Is there a Wayne Foundation building as well as the Kane building where Batwoman operates out of? And how many buildings in Gotham have trees growing in the center of them? It's kind of it's been so I wanted to kind of touch on all eras of Batman as much as I could. So luckily I got to throw in some of that the Wayne Foundation stuff. I always really enjoyed when Bruce left the Batcave for a bit and had a penthouse and could access the city, and there was all those cool. I want to say it was one of the digests that had some of the secret tunnel where you saw where the Batmobile came out. It had like because I always love those charts when you see them, like the maps of the hideouts or the cutaways of like Titan's Tower or something. That's another reason this book was so much fun, because it's kind of like just a whole book that was that.
Brilliant.
Thank you. I love that answer. It'll be fun looking for all these Easter eggs as we turn the pages. Brad?
You have done so many deep dives on characters and locations throughout, Marvel, DC, all these different universes. Is there a particular character or location that you haven't had a chance to do that with that you would like to?
If we're talking about I have a couple things that I want to do specifically for comics, and a couple things I'd like to do for books. Book-wise, I'd really, really love to write a history of the Thundercats. That's another one of the properties that's been very much something that I've loved ever since I was a kid. And also Dick Tracy. I'd love to write a history about Dick Tracy. I'd love to do comics about both those character groups as well. But yeah, those two, and then Batman, Spider-Man, and Ninja Turtles are what I grew up on. And I've been lucky enough to write Batman, Turtles, and Spider-Man. So I gotta knock those other two off the list, so, whether in book form or comics. Yeah.
Nice, cool. Thank you for that answer. And Steve?
Oh, is you're almost leading my questions for me. Thank you for that. Because obviously, we talked about obviously these brilliant books which are like really great reference guides, but you also make them entertainments. But again, you're a comic book writer, but you've also written TV scripts. I mean, if memory serves, you've written for the Batman Strikes, Legion of Superheroes. How do you juggle all that? And is there a favorite, your prose work, your comic book work, or your TV script writing work?
Well, I've actually not written scripts themselves for TV.
Stories.
I've just written the tie-in comics and things like that. I've not got to do. I did write a short movie that was made, an independent movie a long time ago that I sold to an independent filmmaker, and they made that, and it wasn't the best experience, but but yeah, it's kind of like, for me, what I like to do with all these different, like, because I'll do chapter books and comic scripts, and I'll do, these big prose books. And for me, it's kind of nice to have like a little bit, dip my toe into all of it at different times. It can be really refreshing after you've had written a big encyclopedia to write something fiction. And it can be this, I can go the opposite way as well, where, okay, I don't have to use that creative part of my brain. I can just, you still have to do for sentence structure and, but it's not the same kind of animal where it's like, oh, I can just read comics for a while and then write about them. That's, that's a nice break too. So it's fun really to juggle. I don't know if I would, originally I set out just to write comics, and I'm not sure I would just go that direction anymore. I'm not sure. And I have a passing interest in writing things like film and TV, but it's really, comics are my main thing. And I would actually really like to write some comic strips as well. I did some creator-owned stuff originally with that kind of stuff, some humor strips and things like that, but I never really got to explore that like I would. So maybe one of these days. But one of the nice things about it is that, especially with like this last year has been a little crazy, but to be able to have different avenues available to, I can try to talk to my book editors and see if anybody has a project, or I can look and check with all the comic guys and things like that. So I've been more fortunate that I can kind of switch gears and work on a project. Which keeps, for freelance, you have to constantly keep working if you want to eat. So it's been helpful.
Yeah. We know that feeling, don't we, guys? Absolutely. Brilliant. Thanks so much. Kendra.
Your resume, it's astounding. It's all over the place, from Marvel to Scooby-Doo to Batman to even reaching into the kids genre with Xander and the Rainbow Barfing Unicorns. What is your favorite genre to write? Like, is there one that comes easier? Is there one where you're just like, oh yes, this is where we're going?
It kind of depends on mood and what I'm like. I just go through phases where I'll be really interested in a certain topic or something. I'll go through, I've got to go, I'm like really in, like, for instance, like, I want to read some like Dick Tracy from the 1940s, and I'll be really into that for a couple weeks. And if I'm doing something otherwise, which I've not worked on Dick Tracy, so I normally have to do something else for work, and it's kind of like, that's not as fun. It's best when everything lines up. Like if I'm in a real like DC Comics mood and I'm on a DC project, that's great. It's like, because and I think you can tell sometimes when in that way, because your enthusiasm just naturally, you want to be in the office and you want to be working. And a lot of times, for me lately, it's been I've been developing some creator-owned comic ideas, and for those have been more exciting for me to work on right now, just because it's kind of like, here's my own thing. I'm trying to, and who knows if any of these will get off the ground. I have a couple artists that I've paired with, but we'll see. Sometimes the paying work comes first, and so you'll work on creator-owned on the side, because you can't always guarantee a paycheck with those. So but that's been something I've been really excited to work on. And as far as that, the Xander and the Rainbow Barfing Unicorns, which was a complete surprise to me, I wasn't sure about it. They approached me with just the title. They said, we just have a title of a chapter book series. We're looking for a writer. We didn't know if that would be something, because you do Ninja Turtles and do some kind of zany stuff. Do you want to do something like that? And so I went upstairs and told my daughters the name, and they couldn't stop laughing. And I was like, all right, that seems like something fun. And that just turned out to be an extremely rewarding thing to work on. I'd write the books, and then that would be our bedtime stories at night. I have now they're 7 and 10, but they're a couple years younger, and they just really, it was one of the first things that they all would listen and be excited about. So that proved to be a fun little divergence there from the norm.
Have your own little critique audience.
Yeah, and that it is. I do get. They actually helped with story ideas for that particular book, because I thought, oh, if the for these unicorns, they're talking unicorns from another dimension. It's kind of a send up on My Little Pony tropes and things. And one thing they do, if they don't eat garbage, they barf rainbows, so they can't eat regular food. And that's kind of like the gag of the book. And so my oldest daughter said, "Oh, their hideout should be in a junkyard." And I'm like, "It should be in a junkyard. That's great." and so she came up with that. And then my youngest came out with, I was like, I need a funny name for a world where no one's allowed to talk. And my youngest said, "Shush your bum." So that became the name of the land where no one is allowed to talk.
Oh, wow. I hope these girls are on commission.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, they get no pizza, but besides, dinners. Free dinner for 18 years, I guess, is what they get.
Not a bad trade-off.
Yeah.
Brad?
How do you approach your research with these like insight book projects, these more like encyclopedia, that word again, projects? It seems like it would be so daunting just to do all the research that goes into a project like that.
It can be, especially because a lot of times, for the book projects especially, a lot of the time is spent negotiating between the book publisher and, say, Marvel or DC. And that's just part of the process. They have to do it. But by the time it gets to me, a lot of times our deadlines are shorter than I'd like them to be. So for instance, the book I just did was a very fast turnaround and a lot of research. And so that's the daunting part of it. If I had a little extra time for this last book, I would have liked an extra month. But I mean, it's extremely thorough the way it is now, so I probably didn't need it. But for these, a lot of it's just reading, grabbing as many trade paperbacks, from either my shelf or ordering some, or I always see what my local comic shop has first, because I'm still in the comic store I head in every Wednesday, at least, so a lot of it's not as daunting because I keep up with a lot of the titles. I've fallen behind on some. That's the problem when you work on a book like this. Say I'll get a Wolverine book and then I'll work and I'll only be reading. I'll read like 400 Wolverine comics or something, but that means I can't read anything else. And by the time the workday's over, I'm not really interested in watching anything superhero or related or reading anything superhero related for fun. I'm just kind of like, I've done the superhero part of my day, And so that's when I can fall behind. I have I want to say at least a good 1,000 comics that are just in boxes being, waiting to be read. So I'm slowly getting in through. The pandemic helped me catch up a bit on some of it. Yeah, I'm just constantly, and I'm reading comics. I'm constantly reading books, or if I listen to a lot of audiobooks too, to kind of catch up on other things, other genres and things. That way I can do it while I'm doing dishes or, some mowing the lawn, that sort of thing too. So constantly taking things in. I think that's one of the parts about being a writer is I want to be influenced by a lot of things, not just comics. So that's why I have to make times for it. I also, as far as movies go too, I often try to watch a lot of movies that I normally wouldn't. And like if it's and one thing that helped me, I always would watch every movie up for Best Picture, and I've fallen behind on that. I realize I normally only really like the best screenplay ones, but I try to watch a little bit of everything, to try to get some influences coming from other sources. So, but yeah, it's mostly just sitting down and reading the stuff, and and luckily I remember a lot when it comes to superhero stuff. So that helps. But I do, this last book, I actually took 165 pages of notes, and the book was 160 pages long. So
wow,
actually more notes than the actual finished product for this book.
Great, thank you for that answer. And Steve?
Yeah, I feel that I'm in a similar predicament. I've got another show called Superheroes for Dummies, which they did want to be weekly, but the amount of research I have to do means that twice a month is all they're getting. For the Swamp Thing episode, I read close to 200 comics, so that was hard. So that leads me to my next question: is when you handle these massive tomes that you do you have access to the DC vaults, Marvel vaults, etc.? Is a lot of it from your own comic book collection? How do you manage to? I mean, with Exploring Gotham City, it made me pull out long boxes to read some of those stories again, and it was brilliant seeing little Jason Todd pulling the tires off the Batmobile and Gates of Gotham and all that other stuff that you brought up in your book made me want to read those comics again. How do you go about doing that research? Do you get given certain open doors, or how does it work?
It kind of depends on the projects, but lately it's been a lot less as far as getting things. It's very hard to get. DC can send assets, it just the process takes so long, and the deadline will take a long time. I mean, I don't have enough in the deadline. It'd take a lot of time of the deadline if I just relied on DC. A lot of for the Batman specifically, I pretty much have everything I need here. Not because I have a massive Batman collection. For Marvel, I have a massive collection, but they're all in trade paperbacks, which I've been trying to find. I just can't bring myself, since Batman was the first character I ever collected, I haven't ever, I just keep buying Batman in issue form. But Marvel, I buy lots of trades. And the subscription services have been help. I know DC just launched there, so that will be helpful in the future, I should say. But Marvel has been helpful. Actually, DC's, I was a member of their, what was it? Their streaming service. I'm not DC. I can't remember the name now, but that actually helped me pulling a lot of stuff on some of the more recent books, stuff that I just don't have. And then, I just have to kind of find things where I can, back issue bins, and, the occasional library book, which is nice. Because when I was a kid, I can't believe the things you can request from the the library these days. Like when I was a kid, we had one collection of the Hulk, one collection of Spider-Man, and I think there was a couple Dick Tracy things, and then a lot of like newspaper strip things like Calvin Hobbes, but I read everything that was at our library. But kids today are spoiled. You can pretty much request almost any trade paperback, which is really nice. And so things like that have been helpful. They can sometimes, depending on the project, they'll give me a budget for certain things, and I can go out and buy some. Sometimes they've set DC, before it was DC Entertainment. Some of the editors would just send me boxes of stuff, and for Batman Files in particular, they sent me a big box of trade paperbacks, and I said, I have all these things. And they're like, we just want to make sure all the page numbers, because they wanted me to reference the page numbers from the trade paperbacks. So they sent me all these trade paperbacks for it, and I was like, all right, I don't really need these, but thank you. That was very nice.
Who's going to say no to that?
Yeah, it did make it easier. I wish that still happened. That really hasn't happened on any projects lately. Actually, Sideshow sent me a lot of stuff that wasn't really they sent me a couple of examples of some of their books, which is very nice. But then they also sent me one of their really nice deluxe action figures of the Joker, and they sent me a print. And so I was like, oh, I want to work more for Sideshow. So, but yeah, it really is mostly like scouring to find the stuff. My personal Batman collection, I think my detectives go back to, I want to say, definitely the Englehart era. I have everything from then, and at least issue 300 from Batman. But then I have a lot of sporadic issues between then, and then a lot of stuff in trades or archives, the stuff that I could never afford. But I like I said, I've been collecting, since. Been going weekly to the comic store since '89. So,
well, we're kindred spirits. My Batman collection sporadically goes back to the 40s and 50s, but it's completely uninterrupted from 1984 to present. That's Batman Detective miniseries and his other appearances as well. So I feel you. And if one tip from one researcher to another, Hoopla Digital, it's magic. Follow that one up. It's great. Every library in the world digitally at your fingertips. Go for that. It's brilliant. Thank you, Matt. Brilliant answer. Kendra.
What is a question that you wish was asked more of you in interviews, and what would be your answer to that question?
Oh, that's a hard one. I'm not really sure. Everybody's been doing such a good job lately every time I'm doing one of these. Probably I like it if, I mean, I don't have anything right now to talk about, but once I do have creator-owned books, I always like to, be able to talk about, personal projects or plug other things like that. Because it is harder to get creator-owned books in stores. But I have really nothing yet to talk about on that front. So things, in development that I'm not allowed to say any names of anything yet. But so it's like, I guess that would be it. But otherwise, there's not. They're pretty thorough these days.
Brad.
Do you write fiction and nonfiction stuff at the same time, or do you, depending on your schedule? And is it hard to shift gears creatively between the two for you?
I have done that in the past. I prefer not to if I can, but you can't really. I don't often turn down comic projects, especially if they're fun ones. So like I was writing, I can't remember if it's been a while now. I feel like I know I was writing Batman: A Visual History, which is a DK book, a month by month history of Batman, where we literally talk about everything from the 39 until now. And I think I had the schedule a week in there to write a comic. I can't remember what it was now. It might have been a Ninja Turtle project or something around. I feel like I was doing things around that era. But the problem with that particular book is then they had to decrease our deadline by a month. So all of a sudden, all these things that were all lined up to work perfectly didn't work. And so I ended up not being able to write the 1960s section of that book, which still bothers me. I wish I got to do it. I did get to outline it and choose all the comics for it and kind of bullet point why we're talking about these comics. And then they let me come in and proofread and change anything. But I still didn't get to. I was saving that actually for the last because I thought it'd be a fun one to work on. And then they were like, we have to have another writer come in. I'm like, oh. So they can't. I mean, that was a case where the deadline was increased, but I really try not to overbook anything. I don't think I've ever really overbooked. Cause I think I've made every single deadline that was the deadlines in the contracts. So I have worked on something, and also some days. Some of these book projects, I'll work 5 days of the week on the book project, and then on the sixth day, I'll feel inspired to work on something on my own, or get started on one that's coming up soon. But it's really not that hard to shift gears. I mean, it's harder to shift from fiction to something, from one fiction to another, I guess I should say. So it's harder to write. Like when I was writing Beware the Batman, it would be hard to switch gears to write Ninja Turtles. On that, like on the same day, I wouldn't probably do it. But just because I get so much in the characters' heads, that can be hard. Nonfiction is much easier because you can just kind of, the facts stay the same. But when you're writing characters, I want to be involved in that world as much as I can. If you're doing a character voice or something, so the voice matches throughout. So if you're shifting from one to another, it can be difficult if they're from different universes or something.
Okay, great. Thank you so much for that answer. And Steve?
That's great because it ties into my question as well beautifully, because you co-wrote one of my favorite books of the last few years, Anatomy of a Metahuman, which is fiction and non-fiction in one sort of thing, because you're looking at how these powers work. And it's brilliant that you wrote it from Batman's perspective as if it was his guide on finding the weaknesses of the Justice League from the Grant Morrison run. And how did that work? I mean, because I see a lot of stuff in there that is definitely based on comics. But did you speak to any anatomy specialists, doctors, medics for some of the other stuff? Because the depth and the illustrations in that book as well. I love that book. Please tell us a bit more of how you got to work on that one.
Oh, sure. But actually, all the anatomy and all the scientific or the kind of like the faux scientist stuff, that was all my co-writer, S.D. Perry. And she just did an amazing job. She really, figured out her version of how these things would work in real life. I remember she was most frustrated with Aquaman because she's like, I just can't wrap my head around how the density would work, down that deep at the bottom of the ocean. And but I left almost all of that was up to her. I came in for that book. My job was to put it in Batman speak. So I came in and wrote it as Batman. And then I just kind of like she had all the facts. I rewrote it as Batman, and then if there were things that contradicted the comics, there might have been a couple little things in there that contradicted a couple things in the comics here or there, but they were so minor that I felt like it was her theory was more important than sticking exactly to it. I think almost always though we did. And so yeah, I was kind of the fact checker or the they've already done this in the DC universe, that sort of thing, or and I was the one that I wrote all the sections about anything more comic based. So there was like the scene a section where it's like I think the notes, the audio notes from when Bane was being experimented on. So I'd write sections like that, or I'd write like I wrote all of this is how Batman's theories on how to defeat all the characters if need be. And so all the more comic aspects were for me, because she's not really a comic person per se. She's more her background's more in science fiction and writing these really, interesting type of books like this, where it's it sounds like it could be plausible science, and where I wouldn't be able to do nearly as good a job as she does for that. So.
It was seamless. It read like straight out of the comics, but the detail it felt really medically sound. So I love that book. Thank you so much, Kendra.
What are the differences in how you prepare for, let's say, like being an outsider looking in while writing a comic book versus being the voice of an actual character like you did with the journals for Joker, Harley, or for the world of, or as seen by? What is the difference in how you prepare for that with the way the tone shifts in perspective?
I guess the difference is you can be a little bit more clinical with when you're writing in as just as a researcher writing about the comics and stuff. I do prefer like when we get to put a spin on it, like the Batman Files does tell pretty much all of Batman's entire history, but it's from his voice. And so that was a lot of fun just to write in that voice. It can be more creative to think, oh, how would he say it? At the same time, it gets really depressing when you write about Batman's entire life from his point of view, because just not much good happens to him. So there was that aspect of it. Actually, after writing the Batman Files and everything, I was offered either to write The World According to Joker or The World According to Batman, and I chose Joker in a heartbeat, just because it was going to be a nice relief to switch the voice to like a silly, zany, kind of thing. One thing that happens is I do a lot more bad impressions of characters' voices out loud in my desk downstairs. So my family thinks I go a little crazy, like when I was writing the Batman Turtles, there was a lot of bad Mark Hamill Joker impression going on. Just because I always read everything I write out loud afterwards, just to make sure everything actually sounds natural like the character. So there's a lot of that. Whereas, I can, when I proofread something of like, say, the Batman visual history, it's more of a monotone, like just making sure all the sentences flow nicely and the structure is not off.
Thank you. I really like that it's not often that you get to hear what the difference is on how an approach happens. So I like that you let us know that, instead of continuing on with Batman, you were ready to jump onto Joker because it was, that different set of mind. So I appreciate that. Brad?
I find that it's not easy to find other fans of comic strips, like newspaper comic strips. So I'm curious what your favorite one is and why.
It would be tough. Maybe the all-around perfect strip, I think, is probably Calvin Hobbes. And I didn't know that Bill Watterson lived fairly close to where I did growing up. I have two friends now in comics that are both actually good friends with him, and so they both described to me, he's only not too far from your house. So that would have been huge for me as a kid if I would have gone and stalked his house. I'm sure he would have liked that. But yeah, so probably Calvin Hobbes. I love the Dick Tracy from I want to say around 45 maybe to 1945 to like, I don't know, probably about 55 even. That era I like a lot. I love Peanuts at the beginning, early Peanut strips where the style is a little bit I don't know. I like the style that he started with rather than what it kind of evolved to later on. And some of those strips are just still laugh out loud funny, which is really impressive to hold up that long. So those are probably my top three. I can narrow it down to that maybe. Also, I really like the he's not on the visual side as good, but Gary Larson's Far Side had a big impression on me as a kid too. That was some of the first comics I ever did was one panel comic strips for like my school paper and the school, and I actually did it for our local newspaper. They let me do it for like 4 weeks for that. So that was a big influence on me back then.
Cool. Thank you for that answer. And Steve?
Yeah, all of those are absolute winners. Brilliant. I wanted to ask about personally your connection with comics. This is one I like to throw at writers. Can you remember the first comic that you ever loved as a child, and what was the comic you picked up that made you think comics have grown up? This is what comics can be.
Yeah, well, I mean, I actually did start with reading. I've always loved any kind of that, just the comic format. So I really started reading comics was probably, every week with the newspaper, the Sunday funnies and things. So that was probably the first place I actually read any kind of comics. And then I sought out a lot of collections for those. But then my very first comic book was Batman and the Outsiders #10, and that was just a huge influence on me as far as like, I don't know. I mean, I still have that original copy, and it's just shredded. It's destroyed because I must have read it so many times as a kid. Like who are these other people? I knew who Batman was from Super Friends or like guest appearances on Scooby Doo or the Adam West Show, but I didn't know who all these other characters were. And I think that's where it started to open up. There's a large universe. So I never understand when people say, "Oh, this is too daunting." A numbering like a pickup issue like 400 of a comic. This is too daunting. There's too many in there. But that was really a lot of the appeal to me was after that I went to the comic store and just there was so much there to explore and like, oh, I could find all this stuff. But I think when my aunt gave me a copy of for Christmas, one of the first, there weren't that many trade paperbacks back then, and she gave me a copy because of Batman Year One, and that was one that really affected me, and as well as Dark Knight Returns. And I read those about the exact right age, because I was in, I think, fifth grade when the '89 Batman movie hit, and that was it for me. I went from being this comic strip guy to having to do comic books because once I started reading some of those early Legends of the Dark Knight series, I was just completely hooked. These were just like the perfect comics for me, and I mean, I don't know if there's that many better Batman stories than what was coming out at that time. And absolutely. Which is interesting because everybody thinks that because of nostalgia, but like being a Batman historian who's actually read almost everything, it's like really hard to say, this probably is the best it's ever been. There's been some, every era has some really good comics, but that was probably that early or that late 80s period for Batman was really the highlight. And you could see so much influence on the Tim Burton movie. And I was still new enough to comics that I didn't critique the movie, as I'm sure I know people just like a few years older than me were like, oh, this isn't like the comics. Why is he wearing all black? Why is he not this muscular guy? But to me, it was always like an Elseworld kind of view of, well, this is an alternate reality, and I just absolutely love those first two Batman movies. I absolutely love more than any Batman movies that have come since, and I've liked a lot of them. But so that and that I can chalk up also to there's a lot of nostalgia involved in that too. But I'm also a very visual person, and the visuals they haven't been beaten in any other Batman film. Is the Tim Burton and Anton Furst and Bo Welch's designs. They're just some great stuff. So.
Well, hence the using them again in Exploring Gotham City, I guess. And Legends of the Dark Knight's coming back, Matthew.
Oh yeah, I've heard. Actually, I hope maybe I'll get it. I'll try. I always when I see these things, I always kind of like send a pitch in and hope something works out, or I'll talk to editors and hope I can get on a book like that. Because I was very sad when that got canceled, because I was really starting the first incarnation. I was just starting to do comics around that time, and they ended. I'm like, that's the dream. But luckily, I've got to do some of those story ideas in other places, and So I think like one of the first comics I ever pitched was set in during the No Man's Land era, and I didn't really know how to pitch a comic, so I was just I had this script and I was giving it to people, which no one really will sit down and read a script. But luckily I actually got to turn that script into an issue of my first issue I did of Batman Strikes. I got to expand that little 8-page story that I'd written and do it as an entire 20-page comic for that. And so that was a very fun thing too, when you kind of first get those those stories in. Although that issue, I don't think I did the best job of making it feel like an issue of that tied into that cartoon. It was more like a straight Batman story that just took place in the Batman world. I've since really tried to match the style. Like if I'm doing an animated tie-in, I really try to match that world that they create as much as I can, because I think otherwise it is doing a disservice. Like I don't want to put too much of my version of Batman in when this is a specific version of Batman, and so I wanted to match that. So I kind of changed my approach on that over the years.
Brilliant, thank you, Kendra. I think there'll still be a last round of questions before we let Matt go. So your next one, please.
My next and my last one would just be, what is a piece of advice that you wish someone had told you when you had first started writing that you would like to give to others who look as into writing as their profession?
I think I got a lot of good advice when I was I went to a lot of conventions as a kid, as many as I could. I lived in the middle of nowhere, Ohio, and my parents were nice enough. I think either once or twice they drove me to the big show, which was there was a WizardCon in Chicago. So they just knew that I wasn't changing my mind and I wasn't going to be, a job that was like a dentist or something that would be reliable. And so they did help a lot with that, nurture that interest. And so I got an opportunity to ask, and I'd ask every professional I met, artist or writer, because I wanted to do both originally. I actually went to college at the School of Visual Arts, which is the only school in our country that has a cartooning major at the time. I'm not sure if anything has sprouted up since. So, going to that particular school, I got a lot of advice. And going to an art school, I realized I wanted to be a writer. So there was a lot of I realized how intense this was, and I just didn't have the passion. I would be drawing a comic, and I really was already in my head going on to the next one. So once I get the idea out, I didn't really want to linger on it and make it amazing. I wasn't a natural artist, and I met a lot of amazing artists who this is what they do. They just fill sketchbook after sketchbook because this is their passion. And I was that way, but my books were all just notes, with a couple like sketches for a drawing or something, but more for story ideas. And so I did get a lot of good advice in college and at different conventions and speaking to professionals. But I think the thing I would say to anybody starting in comics in today's world is get a day job you enjoy as well, because it takes a long time. And I was naive to thinking, I'm just gonna get I'm gonna make a living off this right out of college. And I graduated in 2001, and I think it took about 9 years before I could make a full living off of just writing. So because I know when I turned 30, I quit my day job and said, this is it. I was getting more and more clients, and I was either going to have to turn down projects or I was going to have to quit my day job. And it was not a question for me. I definitely did that. But what that helped me was having a good day job that I enjoyed. I bounced around from a lot of temp jobs and bad jobs for a while. And then I got a job that was it was ridiculous. It was for this research company that has been bought out by Nielsen since, but we literally just watched television and then wrote trivia questions about what we were watching to put on this website. And it was kind of like people were answering like questions about product placement and things like that, and just comprehension of the shows, and then they would sell that information back to the networks. And so that job had a lot of downtime because we'd watched the shows live, and so I would volunteer for the worst jobs because the worst one was Martha Stewart Living. It was just awful because we had to write about all the product placement, and there was so much product placement in that show. And so I would come in for that, and then I would volunteer to work on the late show, and so because it was an hourly job, and so I would be all the way until working on Letterman at night, and I would have like this gap of like sometimes 3 hours, and that's what I would do comic writing. I wrote I remember I wrote a Batman versus Dracula story for the Batman Strikes while at the job, and so I think that's the important thing, is have a job where you don't mind doing your something that's probably not even creative, because that way you can focus your creative energy elsewhere. And a lot of comic professionals, they are working comic professionals that also have a day job, and there's nothing wrong with that. It's just the way their lives are, and a lot of times that can give you the freedom to pick and choose assignments more. But like I said, that's one of the reasons I work in writing prose and comics, because I can juggle it, and so one is almost can be like a day job when the other one isn't. So it works out. Whether if I still I couldn't make a living just on comics right now. I'd have to write something else, or work in something else. So I'm happy that I can write these kind of books that are comic adjacent, or just completely different things like chapter books and things, and just make a living on it. So that is the one thing that people have to be taking into consideration, is the practical. Like, freelance is hard. You're not going to get job after job all the time, and so you do need something to fall back on for a while, especially.
That is solid advice. Thank you so much for that. Brad, I'll turn it over to you.
Okay. Between all the research and, you're so prolific, and you mentioned, reading the 4,000 or whatever it was, Wolverine comics, but you
400 for that one.
yeah, and you have such passion for the comics and that world. How do you maintain that passion when there is so much into the work side of things? How do you still keep the enjoyment of that going?
Yeah, that is something I think everybody kind of struggles with a bit, is because when your hobby becomes your job, it doesn't feel like a hobby, and that can be a problem, because it's like I've said, even in high school, if there was some sort of comic book programming on television, there was no way I would miss it. And now, besides the fact that there's so many options, at the end of the day, a lot of times I'm like, I don't really want to watch anything like that. so that still does happen, as far as like I'll lose my enthusiasm for certain things. But for me, what it is I have one of the boxes that I'm not in a hurry to read. I have a entire long box of Bronze Age comics, and that's where I'll go to if I need some inspiration or something. I'll like, here's a Denny O'Neil comic that I've only I've never read fully or something, or I've browsed through or something for a project and never got to read, or so things like that. I'll keep up. I have things like there's a lot of different things on my bookshelf that are different stages of being read, like those Dick Tracy collections. There's some that are purposely not getting read, because those to go to when I need some inspiration for something, or that sort of thing. Or I'll revisit some things that I loved like so much as a kid that I can just remember being like 100% into, and that always helps. And then a lot of times these projects will be like the character I just did a book about for Marvel. It's something I wasn't reading in the 80s and 90s, and even though the book covers this character's whole history, I really focused in on those comics that I would have read when I was a kid, and it was just so much fun. Like, these are things I saw on the racks and didn't have enough money to buy, and so when I can delve into that sort of thing and kind of reignite that teenager feeling of going into a comic store and getting excited. And that's something else I do too a lot, which my wife's not crazy about. But whenever we travel, I visit the local comic shops, because I still love going and seeing different stores, and especially if they have, for new readers, you kind of need to be like more of a boutique store these days. But I still love something about a comic store that hasn't been touched since the 80s. That's just like, has that old book smell kind of to it, and got some of those back issue bins might have dust on them, but you might find some real treasures in there. And so that's still another way that I keep my enthusiasm up. Like, when I go to Comic Cons, I'll even leave a con sometimes to go look at the local comic shop downtown, even though they probably have a booth at the show. Mm-hmm. But it's just, I think we went to Hawaii on our honeymoon, and we went to at least 3 comic shops in Hawaii, because I needed to see what comic book stores were like in like an island paradise, you know. So it's just that.
Great. Thank you so much for that answer. And Steve?
Brilliant. Thanks so much, Matt. So obviously I have to close off the show talking about your new book. Obviously my review went live today. Thanks for the kind words about the review, but thanks for giving us such a great book. Now, I sold it my way with my review. Let's tell our listeners why you think they should pick up this brilliant new book, Exploring Gotham City.
I think one thing I was trying to do with this book was make it something that anybody could approach, whether if you're a brand new reader or someone who's read this for as long as I have or longer. I think that's one of the balances that this book, at least I hope it hits that, because that's one of the things is all these coffee table books have to be accessible. And they have to be someone who's just discovering comics for the first time. And so I think this book does a good job of telling people, hey, you know, if you've never seen Gotham, here's a lot of the cool stuff about it. Let's take a look at it. But if you're a longtime fan, I throw in plenty of things in there that are kind of like, oh yeah, there was Poison Ivy had a hideout on Park Row in Gotham City for a while. You know, things you might have forgotten from comics that you read, back decades ago. So I hope people find it like that. But and if not, otherwise the visuals in this book are just incredible. It's one of my favorite books just because of how it looks, which was another Anatomy of Metahuman. Just the way Ming Doyle drew it just is fantastic. And you know, when a book comes out better than expectations, that's always very exciting for me to see the pages or something. So, and this is one of those books that I think it's probably in my I might even be in my top 5 books that I've written so far. And it becomes harder and harder when there's, you know, the more you write. So, but yeah, I hope people enjoyed as much as I enjoyed writing it.
Brilliant. Well, I loved it. Thanks so much for taking the time to speak to us. Thanks for all the great work. Obviously, we'll be keeping up with all of it as it comes out. Anything else on the pipeline? Anything new that you can talk about that we should look out for?
I think I want to say that everything. This one is probably the biggest one that's just that's coming out right now. The other 2 big ones that are coming out are still in the secret area. So probably you can just always, you know, catch up on my website, MatthewKManning.com. I update the blog whenever. At least I try to update the blog as much as I can in between projects. You can always tell when I'm doing an intensive book because my blog starts to get less and less frequent. I did do recently the DC Encyclopedia, the new edition that's coming out of that. It will be out I think in a few months. They're just finally putting the finishing touches on it now. Every once in a while I'll get a email about it. And for that one, I wrote all of the large entries. So those books, one person can't tackle them, especially with the timeline involved. So all the main entries in that book, I wrote all the 1-page, 2-page spreads, or some longer ones like for Batman's entries. So that was another one that was fun to get to research some of the characters that I've fallen behind on. And that one, that's the new edition of that. It's coming out. I don't know the date on it, but they just... I think we just put it to bed this week, hopefully. So
fantastic. Right, so before we wrap up, Kendra and Brad, let us know where we can find your work, and then we'll do the same with our wonderful guests. So Kendra, where can our listeners find you across the internet?
I can be found doing news and review pieces for Dark Knight News and DC Comics News, as well as Fantastic Universes and reviews for a plethora of other things. If you like to read anything that I have, or if you have questions, you can find me on Twitter at DevourAllWords.
Okay, and you can find me writing news and reviews with DC Comics News. You can also find me on the Harley Quinn podcast on the DC Comics News Podcast Network, and you can follow me on Twitter at FlickyB1. And Steve, where can people find you?
As for me, for my written work, news, reviews, and interviews, just type Steve J. Ray or Fantastic Universes into your search engine of choice. Listen to this wonderful show with my friends and the occasional super guest star like Mr. Manning, or just hit me up on Twitter at LStevo, EL_STEEVO. Now, our special guest, Mr. Manning, where can your readers, our listeners, catch up with you on the social internet, on social media, and where can they read more of your stuff and let us know about your blog?
Yeah, it's my website is just MatthewKManning.com, and I'm on Twitter at Matthew K. Manning, and I'm also on Facebook, one of the Matthew Mannings on there. and then just otherwise, I've got stuff should be in most bookstores and in comic shops. Always support your local comic store whenever you can, and independent bookstores. Especially now, it's more important than ever to keep these places in business. And that's about it for me.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. And Matt, is there something you think all our listeners and all our readers should be doing?
Yes, of course. They should read more comics.
Yay. Thank you so much. Have a great evening and thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having me.